So I want to start with a story about a gentleman that I used to work with. His name was Jim Rochadle. Jim was a fascinating guy. He was an eccentric guy, and he would walk into my office from time to time, and he would ask the question, "What is on the screen?" He would say, "What is the answer to the ultimate question?" So I think Melissa is still on with us. Melissa, what is the answer to the ultimate question?
Oh yeah, sure. The answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything is, of course, 42.
Of course, 42. And that was what Jim would tell me, that the answer to the ultimate question is 42. And where does that come from?
That would be from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
All right. And Melissa, as we all know, is a prolific reader. She has read just about every book, including the trilogy. And how many books in that trilogy, Melissa?
I think there's 4 or 5 or 6 or something like that.
Right, exactly. Why wouldn't there be 4 or 5 or 6 books in a trilogy? Well, we are going to use this concept as we dive into our discussion today. The answer to the ultimate question is 42, but today's ultimate question is, how do we teach Industry 4.0 in 2020? And as it turns out, the answer to this ultimate question is also 42. Or put another way, the answer to this ultimate question is 6 times 7, which we all know equals 42. What we mean by that is that there are 6 building blocks of Industry 4.0. We are going to talk about that, and we need to deliver them in all 7 elements of distance learning. And that's how we get to 42, 6 building blocks of Industry 4.0 and 7 elements of distance learning. And as we head into the fall and prepare our classrooms and prepare ourselves to deliver really effective learning, that effective learning in the world of Industry 4.0 is going to look exactly like what you see on your screen. So let's start out by talking about the 6 building blocks of Industry 4.0. Some time ago, we decided that we would take it upon ourselves to determine in the world of Industry 4.0, what should our students be learning? We didn't come up with the answer to that question on our own. We turned to the experts. We turned to people like Mike Chico, who's the president and CEO of FANUC America, and Bob Meyer, who for years headed up the University of Wisconsin Stout as its chancellor. Brian Tanzen, who is at the time was the head of connected systems for Cisco. Our friend Brian Albrecht from Gateway, Paul Perkins from Amatrol in Jeffersonville, Indiana, Tom O'Reilly, who's the vice president of global business development at Rockwell. These are just some of the folks that we asked as we begin teaching Industry 4.0. What does that need to look like? That turned into a white paper. Many of you have probably seen or possibly even read that white paper. The folks at the Milwaukee 7, the 7-county regional economic development engine here in southeastern Wisconsin, where I am today, picked that up as well and actually made those building blocks the cornerstone of their strategy for preparing the M7 for Industry 4.0. So what are those building blocks? Let's walk through them. We need to integrate every single one of these into our learning in Industry 4.0 as we head into the fall. The first one is building block number 1, industrial success skills. That starts with soft skills. We talk about that all the time. We make that simple. We talk about people, young people that were raised right by their parents, that have good values, that know that it's important, that they need to be at work, that they need to stay off of drugs, that they need to be able to take some level of direction. But it's so much more than that. They need to have a fundamental understanding of throughput equations. I tell people in my 20-some years in running manufacturing companies, show me somebody who has read The Goal by Goldratt and understands what's in it, and I will show you somebody who is worth their weight in gold in manufacturing. We need to understand throughput and things like standardized quality. What are the systems we use to produce quality products? And of course, lean manufacturing and lean processes. How do we drive the 7 deadly wastes out of our processes? Building block 2 is also fundamental to Industry 4.0. The truth of the matter is, before we get into things like smart sensors and smart devices, we need to learn about industrial equipment and technology, processes like basic AC/DC electrical, like mechanical drives, like fluid power, all of these base technologies, CNC and machining and welding that manifest themselves in manufacturing. And we need to teach that before we worry about teaching Industry 4.0. But then we start to graduate into some of the more advanced technologies like smart sensors and smart devices. What makes a smart device or smart sensor smart is its ability to communicate with other devices and its ability to make decisions, have embedded intelligence. Our students need to know, how do we get information into a smart device? How do we get it back out? What type of applications can we use smart devices for in manufacturing. The fourth education building block when it comes to Industry 4.0 is control systems, things like programmable logic controllers, CNC controls. These are the computers of manufacturing, inputs and outputs, discrete I/O. We need to understand things like variable frequency drives. This is the equipment. These are the computers that control our manufacturing processes. They are fundamental to industry, and our young people heading into Industry 4.0 environments, and people of all ages heading into those environments, need to be familiar with that technology. Building block number 5 is connectivity and networking. So now all of our equipment, all of our systems, all of our control systems are becoming networked. They're all talking to each other. We no longer have manufacturing plants that are air-gapped, that are separated by space, that can be protected in terms of the information that we have in them. One of the scariest things to any manufacturer when it comes to connected systems in Industry 4.0 is what happens if somebody gets access to our confidential information, to the secret sauce, if you will, the way that we make our product. We need to make sure that our people know how we can continue to keep that information proprietary and continue to keep it protected. They need to understand things like managed switches and unmanaged switches. They need to understand firewalls. They need to understand data collectors. All of these things are part of that 5th building block. And building block number 6 is informationable data, taking the data, the hordes of data. We're producing way more data in manufacturing than ever before. And how do we take all of that data and analyze it in a way that discerns the information that's really actionable, that can really drive change on the manufacturing floor and throughout the enterprise, and separate that from the rest of our data that is just basically a sea of data that provides no real value for the organization. And then how do we analyze the important, valuable data to drive change and to drive improvement? That is the 6th building block. Those aren't our building blocks. These are the building blocks that were shared with us by some of the most recognizable subject matter experts in technical education and in advanced manufacturing. So that's what those 6 building blocks look like. But again, we can't get to 42 with just those 6 building blocks. If the answer to the ultimate question is 42, we need to multiply that by the 7 elements of distance learning. Folks, our classrooms and our labs are not going to look in September the way that they did in February. They're going to look much different. And it's incumbent upon all of us to create as interesting and as interactive an experience as we possibly can for our students and for our learners. And that's where these 7 elements of distance learning come into play. We need to take our 6 building blocks of Industry 4.0 and deliver them through all 7 of these elements, and they look like this. The first one, of course, is live lecture. That is what we are doing right now. We are sitting through a live presentation of data, of information, of content, producing and sharing the theory around what it is that we're learning in a live lecture format. And that, whether that is in person or whether that is via a platform like Zoom, live lecture will play a significant role in the way that we deliver learning. But then from there, we get into e-learning. And e-learning to us is a interactive, multimedia-based experience for a student, where a student is going into an online platform or perhaps a platform on a server and learning the technology, the theory that they need to learn. And they are gathering information in an interactive way with constant knowledge checks and quizzes and computer-level graphics that really keep that student engaged. And e-learning is one of the 7 elements of distance learning. Would you believe in a recent survey that we did? 80% of our respondents in some spaces, including the university level, were using some element of e-learning in their distance learning procedures and in their distance learning approach during the 2nd semester of this last year. So the 2nd element is e-learning. The 3rd element of distance learning is instructor demonstration one-to-many. This is a single instructor providing a demonstration to a cohort of students. So we could have 10, 20, 30, even more students online at a given point in time, as an instructor was demonstrating a skill, demonstrating a process to a group of students. So this is one-to-many, one instructor to many students providing a demonstration. That's the 3rd element of distance learning, and it needs to be integrated into our learning and our distance learning approaches. Number 4, virtual skill development. And what we mean by that is performing a virtual skill on an interactive yet virtual training system. In this case, somebody is building an electric relay control circuit on a virtual trainer. And so it's not quite like being interacting with the actual physical asset, but in the absence of the opportunity to do that, it creates a great substitute for teaching technical skills to students. So getting onto a virtual trainer where they are performing a skill in a virtual, safe environment is the fourth element of effective distance learning and will be a key part of our classrooms when we get to September. The fifth element of distance learning and effective distance learning is instructor and student interactive skills. So whereas number 3, instructor demonstration, is one instructor to many students, number 5 is one instructor to one student. And that looks like this. We have a student who is engaging on a virtual platform with their instructor. So it's one student on one side of the computer, one instructor on the other, and the student is coaching the instructor through a virtual skill. So, an actual skill. So as the student is explaining to the instructor what they should be doing, the instructor is performing that skill on the hands-on skills trainer or on a piece of equipment. Again, not exactly like being in the lab, and eventually we have to get into the lab, but in the absence of an opportunity to do so in this day and age of social distancing and smaller cohorts in our labs, this is a great way to get a student started on their interactive skills. Number 6 in our 7 elements of distance learning is hands-on skill development. So as we just said, eventually we need to get students into the lab learning in a hands-on environment. And you won't get any argument from me that that is incredibly, incredibly important. It is incredibly important. But the point is that our labs are going to look a little bit less like this one when we get to fall, and they're going to look a little bit more like this, where our students are separated, where they are socially distanced, where they are probably using PPE. In this case, they don't necessarily have masks on, but that likely becomes masks and face shields an important part of learning. It'll become the same as any other PPE like hearing protection or goggles that we put on when we're in a manufacturing environment. And so making sure that our students are working safely, making sure that their equipment is properly disinfected, making sure that we're limiting the number of people in the labs, for better or for worse, is going to be an important part of hands-on skill development this fall. But yes, eventually we have to get our students into the lab to perform hands-on skills. The final element of distance learning, of effective distance learning, is portable rotational at-home skills. This is where a student is checking out a rotational portable trainer of some sort from their school, or that trainer is being delivered to the student. The student checks out that portable trainer and then performs the exercises in the safety of their own home. When they have those exercises complete, they sanitize that equipment, or the school sanitizes it. And once that is complete, it goes to the next learner. So portable rotational at-home skills are an important part of effective distance learning as we get into the fall. And when we talk about how to deliver Industry 4.0 learning in 2020, it is truly those 42 combined elements. In other words, every single one of the building blocks delivered in some form across every single one of our effective distance learning platforms. And that is what effective Industry 4.0 learning will look like come September. Now, the big question becomes, how do we prepare? How do we prepare our students and our learners, but even more important, how do we prepare our teachers and our instructors and our professors for this new world of learning that they will be teaching in a way that many of them up until the last couple months of last semester had never really been using? How do we make sure those individuals are prepared for that level of learning in those types of classrooms? Joining me today is one of my favorite people. It is Mike Dietrich. Mike Dietrich runs the entire K-12 business for our company, ATS Lab Midwest. So he's responsible for, either directly or with a group of people that he leads, responsible for those relationships across K-12. Mike is also a phenomenal trainer, and he's a former teacher. We're going to talk about that here in a minute, but Mike is a great trainer, and he does a fantastic job preparing teachers, professors, instructors to provide adequate distance learning and all types of learning on the scope and in the scope of Industry 4.0. So Mike has been with Lab Midwest for about 3 years. I talked to you about what it is that he does in our organization. I did mention that he's a prior and a former middle school teacher. He's got just a fantastic background, great demeanor, very, very well respected. Mike, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the talk this afternoon. I think Mike, we may need to unmute Mike, Melissa, if that's something you can do. There we
Awesome.
go.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Absolutely. No, it's great to see you. Now, it's interesting. We've got a great picture of Mike on the right, and we have a picture of COVID Mike on the left. So fresh haircut, great new look. And it's a pleasure to have you on board this afternoon. So really appreciate you joining us for this really important part of our discussion, and that is we look at these 6 building blocks of Industry 4.0. We look at the 7 elements of distance learning and the important work that you have done and are doing to prepare teachers literally across the country to get back into their classrooms this fall and deliver this learning in a variety of ways and to do so effectively. So I really appreciate you being on board to share some of those stories with us today. Now, you have been responsible for a training program on Industry 4.0, preparing instructors to train both in person and digitally on this really, really important technology. And I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit about that today. Now, as we do that, you've trained a significant number of instructors in Industry 4.0. I know you just recently finished up a program in June of this year. Can you tell our audience a little bit about that program, about who attended the June event, and about what drove the significant turnout that you had at that event?
Yeah, absolutely. We actually had 78 participants over the course of 2 weeks that we were running Industry 4.0 training during the second 2 weeks in June, or the last 2 weeks in June. And I think the biggest driver that, kind of pushed that level of participation was really the growing interest about Industry 4.0 and folks coming in wanting to learn more, but also explore additional resources that instructors might be able to employ for remote or distance learning in 2020 and beyond. I think coming off of what we can all agree is a pretty tumultuous spring semester where a lot of instructors really kind of got thrown into the bullpit of trying to figure out how do we teach hands-on skills remotely and virtually with our students. So I think that was a big driver in terms of getting so many people to attend who just wanted to learn more as well.
Awesome. And it sounds like this was 100% virtual, right?
Yes. We, while we really wanted to do hands-on training like we've done in the past, we made sure that we wanted to make it as accessible as possible. We did about 3.5 hours each day in the morning. We had group sessions and then did some independent work or some guided work, and then kind of brought everything back together to close out the day with feedback, questions, discussion within the group. It was really a two-way street, which is something that we really focused on. And we got a lot of great feedback from it as well. Just being able to run a virtual training like that was definitely a new experience for everyone, but I think there was a lot of value in it.
Absolutely. I'm sure you learned some things, and I know that the attendees in that training learned some things as well. Amazing that you had 78 people. I mean, it sounds like you would have been happy with 15 or 20, and to have that type of turnout from literally across the country is something that you should be really, really proud of. I know one of the things that our audience is going to be interested in understanding is, if you're doing this training in the future, and I assume you are, somebody that's interested in participating in this, is this somebody that's got a fair amount of experience and knowledge in Industry 4.0? Are these kind of your subject matter experts that are just learning a little bit of new technology, or what types of folks are you having attend the instructor training for Industry 4.0?
Yeah, the interesting thing is every time we've done a week-long training or a 2-week virtual training like this, we get a really diverse group of participants, whether it's, industry subject matter experts that are coming from, an advanced technical college program, or even industrial employers and partners who are coming in and want to, understand what the students are learning. All the way down to math instructors who are trying to look for additional ways to incorporate data analytics into their program, or new applications for some of their math concepts. And also to the kind of the classic CTE instructor, someone who teaches, maybe more of the traditional tech ed subject areas, who, again, wanting to learn more, but also being that we're all living in this community of lifelong learners, wanting to learn what's next, how technology is evolving, where it's being applied. I think we get a really nice, diverse group of participants coming in this training. And all that does is just provide more, great discussion points, great background experience, people learning and working off of each other, where even the subject matter expert learning a new teaching strategy from, a high school instructor or technical college instructor, that's where we get some really valuable feedback coming in throughout the training.
Perfect. And it sounds like that interaction among not just folks in the world of education, which obviously is a key part of this, a very, very important part of this, but people from other aspects of the economy as well. You mentioned industry. Tell us a little bit about, did you have folks outside of education that were engaged in this training?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of times we get industry partners that are providing insights to whether it's a technical college or K-12 program, where they want to experience what the students are experiencing. So I often tell them, I don't really care how many times you've set up a pneumatic circuit. I want you to experience what a student experiences. So it's always really refreshing to get their feedback and their input, but then also share how that type of technology or that piece of learning, that particular lesson, applies to their business. The other interesting thing that we've started to see more is starting to get into more workforce development representatives that are attending training. Just in the last training that we had in June, we had members from a state Department of Labor organization participate. We're going to have additional chamber representatives, so regional chamber representatives participating in our next one. And all that really does is just validates the experience, as well as, again, it's really providing those connections between what students are learning to what's happening out in the workforce. And that's really what we want to do, is we want to prepare our instructors to help students see those connections.
And when it comes to those students and the challenges that an educator, whether it's an instructor, a teacher, a professor, might have in terms of working in the classroom, you can really relate to that, right? You've got a background in middle school education. You were a math or a science teacher. You were a social studies teacher. You were a spec ed teacher. How has that background prepared you to work in this environment and to train so many teachers and instructors in Industry 4.0?
Yeah, I think the key thing that I always try to employ when working through training like this is just trying to model differentiated instruction. And I know a lot of my educators out there really understand that term, and they practice that every day. But I used to work in Milwaukee Public Schools at a small K-8 middle school program on the South Side that specialized in individualized and developmental educational approaches to learning. Sounds like a mouthful, but that was actually the acronym for the school. It was called Ideal School. So at any point in time, whether I was working with a caseload of several students with learning disabilities, or even when I was teaching gen ed science and social studies, I had students who were in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, all in one classroom, learning through thematic units, but all kind of at varying and different levels. So the key thing there is managing the chaos and challenging the students, or challenging the participants to, what's going to help them grow, what's going to help them skill up, what they need to improve. And that experience I really try to, model and employ in training, just because, like any instructor out there whether it's K-12, high school, or even doing workforce development, you're going to run into individual learners who might be at different reading levels, or might be able to absorb information verbally, but others who may need to do more of the hands-on kinesthetic learning. So I often work with instructors trying to figure out ways, how can you take the resources that we can provide and the ideas, and how can you employ it in your classroom? How can you challenge your high flyers who are going to run and gun and take on those really advanced skills? And how are you going to manage kind of the bulk of the classroom students? And then also, what do you need to work on specifically as an instructor with either a small group of students or a challenging subject with the entire class. So we really try to model and employ those, and that's always something that I'm trying to inject into our training.
So, and that's so important, right? Because it seems like every single student and every single instructor, their learning styles are going to be a little bit different. And as we're starting to scroll some of the slides from training that you've done, both in person, which you see in the slide here, and also virtual, which you did in the last round, those hands-on skills are really, really important. You see these instructors interacting with robots and mechatronic systems and in all different types of equipment and trainers. Now you take that environment and you're much more virtual than you were hands-on. So talk to us a little bit about how you were able to morph some of the traditional hands-on experiences into more of a virtual experience for the instructors, and then for them to take that learning and that style into their classrooms when they get there in the fall.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that what educators and instructors went through, doesn't matter the subject area this past spring, was a real challenge. And I also think we can all agree that, when you take a CTE, a career in tech ed instructor, and you take away all of their hands-on tools and equipment and their lab space, it's just an enormous challenge. So really throughout the training, we tried to make it as hands-on as possible as we could, modeling a lot of the 7 elements of distance learning, using virtual trainers throughout the first week, modeling an instructor-led demonstration, and then also kind of the do as I do, say as I say, where we were actually able to push out a lot of the resources to everyone who participated, whether it's through the e-learning platform or robot simulation software. And then for some of the more advanced skills, we actually made a very small investment in a couple of cameras and tripods, and had instructors go through some of the e-learning lessons and then walk through a Lab Midwest team member, whether it was myself or some of our other team members up at our tech center or at a local technical college, actually walk through the hands-on skills on a piece of equipment on site at those different locations. So it really, what that did, it would just kind of spurred everyone's gears, thinking a little bit of, hey, if we run into this situation again, how can I best serve my students so that they're actually doing something at home? They're doing something interactive, they're doing something hands-on to the best that we can. So we really tried to model that throughout.
I mean, what a great way to keep the engagement of the student once we're back in the classroom, and certainly of the instructor as well. It's the middle of summer, and obviously making sure that people are fully engaged and are getting a variety of learning opportunities and substituting that hands-on as much as we can. Can you share with us a little bit of the feedback or the takeaways that some of the folks that attended your training sessions may have provided to you?
Yeah, it really, I always look at these training opportunities as, allowing for myself to continuously grow and develop. So we did receive a lot of great feedback, a lot of comments where, instructors who maybe were a little bit hesitant to participate really found that, once you start going through some of the e-learning and understanding the technology behind some of these advanced, mechatronics and Industry 4.0 systems, it becomes really accessible. So I often encourage everyone, if you're interested in trying this out, we accept people all the time, even if they just want to come and learn a little bit more about what Industry 4.0 is, how they could maybe start applying some of these competencies in this classroom. So that was probably the biggest takeaway, is just the accessibility, and that, it's not really telling an instructor, you have to stop doing what you're doing and turn over a whole new leaf and teach something completely different. It's really just building on what a lot of our instructors are already teaching, and then showing the different applications and, modeling some of those, where those new technologies are being used. But I'll definitely say that we encourage anyone who is interested to attend the training. It's completely underwritten by the ATS Lab Midwest team. And, even if it's just for, we have 4 individual courses that are being sponsored by regional technical colleges like Kellogg Community College or North Central Technical College, Waukesha County Technical College, and more. To participate in some of those courses, even if you can just come in for a day and learn a little bit more about what Industry 4.0 is and how you can maybe apply it to, your classroom or your continuous training or workforce development in your area. We'd love to have you. It's really an accessible opportunity just to learn more.
And you've certainly whet the appetite, I'm sure, of the folks that are on today learning about how we teach Industry 4.0 in 2020, using all 6 building blocks of Industry 4.0, using all 7 elements of distance learning, which you've certainly shared with us today. If folks are interested, you have another round of training coming up, Mike, and if so, how do they get involved?
We do, beginning August 10th, the week of August 10th, as well as the week of August 17th. We'll be doing another full 4-course sequence of Industry 4.0 training. I believe Melissa is going to be sending out a follow-up email with a recording of this webinar. We'll also make sure to include a link to sign up for or register for training. And then we'll continue to work with you as we lead up to those days. Make sure you have all the software ready to go and that you get access to the e-learning platform. And we really encourage, if you have anyone else who's interested in checking out this kind of new wave of training and new wave of technology that's impacting all these different sectors and parts of our territory and our region, we definitely encourage you to join up and sign on. We'd love to have you.
Excellent. So we'll make sure everybody looks for that email from Melissa, and I'm assuming Melissa is still on with us and is monitoring questions coming from our audience. Melissa, do we have any interesting questions as we close our time up here with Mike?
Absolutely, and I would encourage everyone, if you do have questions, go ahead and shoot those into that Q&A box. Mike, can you? This is a question that has come up in the past. Virtual training, that's a lot to ask somebody. This is like an all-day thing where they're sitting in front of the computer? Can you tell us what the time frame is for training each day?
Yeah, the last thing we want to do is have someone sit at their computer for 8 hours a day when it might be a beautiful last couple weeks of summer. So really, we start every session in the morning, typically 8 a.m. Central Time, 9 a.m. Eastern, and then we'll run for about 3.5 hours. So we'll start with a group session. Usually there's a different topic each day or a different demonstration each day, and then we do some independent or remote work, but Lab Midwest team and ATS team members are always available, and sometimes we do things that are a little bit more interactive and some things that are a little bit more independent. And then we close out each day probably at around 11:30, I believe, 11:30 Central, 12:30 Eastern. So super flexible. We record the sessions, so even if you have something come up, we can give you the right amount of tools and the work that you need to do to not fall behind. And yeah, that's the nice part about the virtual training. It's very, very flexible.
Great. And if an instructor, I'm just trying to interpret this question, but if they're interested in the e-learning that we'll be using, but they don't have maybe the budget for the hands-on equipment, are they able to combine the e-learning? Does it have to be directly related to the hands-on equipment? Can they use other hands-on equipment for some of those instructor demos? Can you explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. I help advise that all the time. I think one thing that you'll hear from ATS Lab Midwest, you'll never get a hard sales pitch from us. We're always here to support you. I work with instructors all the time to figure out how can we take competencies from a certain certification body or a certain e-learning platform. How can we apply that to the equipment that you already have? We are more than willing to help facilitate that. We're also more than willing to help fill in the gaps wherever needed. So that's something that we're always willing to help consult with you on.
Great. Another question, can we get a certificate of completion, or can this count toward my professional development hours?
Yes, absolutely. We got a lot of those requests for the last training that we ran. And we do, keep track of who participates and which days, but towards the end of the training or the end of the specific course that you're working on, all you need to do is let us know that you'd like a certificate of completion, and we'll be able to provide that for you for that very same thing. We want to make sure it's worth your time and you can prove to your institutions that you were getting some valuable PD over the summer.
Great. It looks like at this moment, that's all we had for audience questions.
All right. Well, thank you, Melissa, so very much for posing those questions to Mike. Let me take this time to thank Mike Dietrich, the Director of K-12 Education for ATS Lab Midwest, for a phenomenal message today, talking about this amazing training that he's doing. He suggested it earlier. It's underwritten by ATS Lab Midwest. It's 100% free. So if you look at this and it seems interesting to you, all we ask is your time and your commitment, and you can participate in this as well and take whatever it is that you learn back into the classroom in the fall.